Now, as we look forward now, we know this is an even numbered year, and that means that it's an election year. And well, politics has gotten bruising these days, and it just seems like civility has been out the window. And of course, you know that unless you've been living underneath a rock, but something caught my attention earlier this year, something called the Civility Project. The Civility Project is a series of sessions that is underwritten by Delta Dental of Michigan, and it includes two very well-known veterans of journalism in Michigan, Stephen Henderson and Nolan Finley. These two oftentimes, and if you know anything about politics in Michigan, you would see them on the opposite ends of the political spectrum. And yet they've come together to launch this thing called the Civility Project. And I wanted to maybe I want you both to address this first question, but let's start with Stephen Henderson. What is the Civility Project?
Nolan and I sit on the opposite sides of the political spectrum. Many issues we find disagreement with each other over, and yet we have been able to forge a really important relationship between the two of us. We are work colleagues, and we are friends, and that's taken about 12 years to develop. And for us, the ability to maintain that relationship, to be able to talk with one another about any number of things without coming to blows is important. It's an important part of who we are, and we wanted to be able to get other people to think about ways to do that same thing. If you think about the numbers of us who avoid conflict with others, or who get into conflict with others and find it, relationship ending. We figured that there was something about the way we had gone about this. There was something about the things that we had done that was worth sharing with other people. And so we've been sharing this with different groups around the state for about a year and a half now. Delta Dental was kind enough to come on as our sponsor. And we're trying to teach other folks what it is that works between us and see if they can replicate it.
Yeah, Brian, Rob, thanks for having us, and thanks to all of your SBAB members. I know it's been a difficult time for small businesses in Michigan, and we appreciate you all and what you do. This really started out as an opportunity for Steve and I to bring our friends together, people from different sides of the political aisle, bring our friends together to drink bourbon and get somebody else to pay for it. And then, when the world started falling apart, when political passions started dividing families and friends and people, relationships, long-term relationships were breaking and fraying, we decided that, we might be able to help people get to a better place. And the project itself, again, thanks to Delta Dental, but the project itself materialized in sort of its current form on Mackinac Island a couple of years ago during the Chamber's annual conference, in which we did an experiment. We brought about 80 couples together, people from different political viewpoints, and asked them to sit down and talk the way Steve and I did for a StoryCorps project. Not talk about politics, but talk about the values and experiences in your life, in each other's lives, that shape their political views. And our goal was to help bring an understanding that people who think differently from you aren't evil. They're not out to destroy the country. They're not stupid. They're just people who take a look at the facts the same way you and I do. Take a look at the facts, apply their experiences and values, and come up and make their opinions. And people of different backgrounds, different experiences are going to come up with different opinions. And if you understand that, where their opinions are coming from, where they're rooted, if you understand that, it makes it easier for you to sit down with them and have a civil discussion, because you know the reasons for why they think the things they do. And it may not, you still may not agree with them, but at least you have a measure of respect. And I think that respect is what has been missing in our conversations over the last few years.
So as we have this audience right now, which is about 500 that are participating in today's annual meeting, I wanted to point out, first of all, that we will have a full session for you coming up on July 15th for the Civility Project. You're just getting a little taste for what it is today, and we're hoping that we get huge participation, even bigger than our annual meeting, to sign up for that. How about, let's go back to Stephen, then why now? I mean, politics has always been kind of rough and tumble. And it does seem like things are somewhat, have been escalating as of late, but why did you guys feel the need to move with something as direct and intentional as this now?
Well, I mean, let's think of the last 3 months for starters, and how difficult it has been to be able to talk through the things that are happening to us and around us with people we disagree with. I mean, both the pandemic and the massive demonstrations that we're seeing in response to police brutality and systemic racism are issues that divide Americans. And maybe that's not the ideal, it's just the reality. And if we are to be able to solve these problems, we're able to come up with ways to deal with them, to make people's lives better, which I think is most people's goals. We got to be able to talk to each other. We've got to be able to exchange ideas in a way that moves us toward those kinds of solutions. You know, I have been fond of saying that civility and the Civility Project is not about avoiding conflict. It's about leaning into it. It's about saying there is a conflict here. We do see this differently. And maybe we see it so differently that we will never come to an agreement about how to deal with it. But I'm better off if I know where you're coming from and understand it, even if I don't agree. And you are better off knowing the same about me. And the way that we move to solutions really requires us to have that knowledge of one another. And we're seeing right now, in some ways, what happens when there isn't enough of that, right? When one side feels terribly aggrieved and not respected, not heard, not understood, there are other things that they will resort to, and those things are understandable as well. But the solution really is being able to lean into these conflicts without them becoming, again, relationship ending kinds of things.
And Brian, you'll understand this as much as anyone. What Steve and I noticed was a hardening of positions. It's starting with our political leaders and then trickling down to the rest of us. This idea that you can't give an inch, that there's no room for compromise. And we aren't getting anything done as a state, as a nation, in our local communities, the things we need to get done, because we have forgotten how to have a vigorous debate that brings us to the middle. And before you can have that vigorous debate, you have to be willing to listen. And, you know, we just thought, as much as anything, you know, we hear about talking to each other. We got to have conversations. We got to talk. As much as anything, we've got to listen. And that unwillingness to listen to someone with respect and with the attitude that, hey, I might learn something from this conversation. Steve and I have been having very difficult conversations for more than a decade now. We butted heads, but every time, almost every time, we've sat down together. We've sat down in that spirit of, yeah, we're going to have a racket here. We're going to go at it fairly, you know, passionately, but we're also going to listen. We're going to hear each other with the idea that we might learn something. I mean, I've never thought, gosh, I'm 100% right and there's nothing I can learn. I want to challenge my own opinions. And Steve's a good sounding board to do that with. And we can all find people like that in our lives to have respectful conversations that challenge our own opinions and that teach us something. And that's the spirit we're hoping people will engage in.
So one thing that really stuck with me about that is this difference. We're not talking about avoiding conflict. Like, the conflict exists, and it's out there. It's a real part of our lives, and sidestepping the conflict. Well, it seems like we kind of tried that in the past, and all it did was kind of allow things to simmer, and now we're seeing kind of boil over in so many different facets, so many different ways. Stephen, could you maybe just touch on or lean into a little bit that conversation about not avoiding conflict, but the value in kind of having it out and putting all those things out there and coming to a point of understanding?
Yeah, I mean, that's what Nolan and I think have learned to do over the past 12 years is to lean into that conflict and walk away not saying, well, I'm done with that person. I'll never speak to that person again. I'm not talking to that guy anymore because I can't have a good conversation with that person. There are a couple of principles I think that have to kind of be in place in order for that to be true. One is something I've been talking about an awful lot the last couple of weeks, which is that the stakes on both sides of the conversation have to be equal. One of the things that we're seeing in these protests, I think, in the streets is a number or how many people feel as though the stakes for them are much higher than for the people on the other side. And because that's true, they're in the streets demonstrating, and they're talking about really radical solutions to our problems, and they are saying they will not back down from those positions. I think in order to have civil exchanges about our problems, those stakes have to be the same. Everybody has to feel like, A, they're being heard, but B, that they don't have more to lose than the other side does. The other real critical value here is the idea of listening. And when we get into conflicts, I think it's harder and harder to actually listen to somebody who's on the other side. We often think of that word listening and think that it's defined by the absence of talking, right? If I'm not talking, I must be listening to you. Well, actually, it's a little more than that. I mean, there's more intentionality involved in the idea of listening. You actually have to be trying to understand where the other person is coming from, trying to understand maybe why they think what they're thinking, as much as they're expressing their opinions about things. You don't want to be sitting and thinking, well, as soon as this person's done talking, here's what I'm going to say back, which I think is how some of us think about listening. I catch myself sometimes doing that. That is not real listening, and you've got to be able to engage in that intentional listening, I think, in order to lean into conflict that way and not find yourself kind of moving in circles. And then the last thing is that commitment to the idea that the relationship you have with this person you're talking to goes beyond the differences that you have. It goes beyond the subject that you might be disagreeing about at that point. And that allows you to, number one, stay in the conversation longer than just the instant dispute that you're having. It allows you to come back to the conversation. The idea of walking away from a conversation when it's reached a point that it can't get to a productive end, I think is a huge part of civility. Saying, look, we can't solve this right now. We're not going to get anywhere. Let's take a break. But I'll be back, and I expect you to be back, and I expect that we'll continue this. I think that is another huge part of this, is that idea that you have a relationship with these people who you disagree with that goes beyond the substance or the scope of those disagreements.
And Brian, I would add what Steve has said in the past many times is that oftentimes in our conversations, even when they get heated, what we find out in the process of talking it out, sometimes fighting it out, is that we share the same end goal. We want to be in the same place at the end of the conversation. We want the same things for our state, our country, our communities, our people. We just have different ideas about how to get there. And once you understand that, and I think you'll find that most people want to end up in the same place. And the fight is about how to get there. Once you understand that, we all basically want the same things. We want prosperous communities. We want a good future for our children. We want good government. Once you recognize that, it makes that whole process of working toward that goal from different approaches a little more, a little easier.
So every morning, or almost every morning, I wake up to an email from a column that is called Nolan Out Loud.
You can sign up at frontnews.com.
Yeah, well, I sign up, and so I know for sure that you have really, really strong opinions about things.
Mhm.
And so one thing I think maybe it's a final point to make as we get through here is that this civility project, we're not talking about not having strong opinions. You're not
Right.
talking about putting your values aside. You're not talking about a less vigorous approach
No.
to making sure your voice is heard and that your cause is advanced. Instead, you're talking about that interaction. Start with Nolan this time.
Yeah, well, I'm going to leave most of the time for Steve because he articulates that very well. But yeah, there are things you're passionate about. It doesn't mean being always quiet and nice. It just means being able to have these vigorous conversations in a spirit of respect and with the end goal of coming together, not necessarily driving apart. But I'll let Steve finish.
Yeah, I mean, so there's a lot of criticism of this word right now, civility,
Mhm.
on both sides of the aisle, and people, I think, associate it with the idea of giving up, right? In order to get along, you're setting aside how passionately you feel about something, or you're setting aside what you really believe. I think we would say it's actually the opposite of that. This requires you to build a relationship that allows you to put all of that out there, to put how strenuously you believe something or how passionately you believe it out there with this other person, to be able to talk about it and to not let it degrade into insult or other kinds of conflict that are not productive. It is about taking all of that passion and all of those beliefs and putting them together in a relationship that's strong enough to be able to survive that conflict. And there are I think there are far too many people right now who just don't have enough of those relationships, just don't seek those kinds of relationships and don't invest in them. And that's really the goal of the project, is to get people to see that there is value in that and that it's possible, that this is not something you can't do. It's harder. We always say that if you find this easy to do, you're probably not doing it right. It is hard. It is difficult. It does require some intentional thinking that we don't always want to do. But I think the value of doing it and then getting the benefits of that kind of relationship are really, 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 really powerful.
Well, this has really been a pleasure to introduce the Civility Project to our membership and our most active members that are participating today at, like I said, a little over 500 now that are a part of today's annual meeting. As a reminder, we will have a full presentation of the Civility Project in webinar format later on next month on July 15th. We will heavily promote that, but hopefully everybody watching this is marking down and will be looking out for your invitation following this to be a part of that conversation, as Nolan and Stephen had just laid out and explained. I mean, you have to go out of your way to make this happen. You know, so often people are now have worlds that their interactions are mostly with people that share their own worldview and expanding that horizon, what a difference it could make. So Stephen and Nolan, thank you so much for being a part of our annual meeting, and we will look forward to the Civility Project being a part of our programming going forward.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Rob.
Yeah, we'll bring bourbon next time.
Yeah. Hey, next
Very
year, I'll have to
Very
remind
good.
you,